Good morning. I really appreciate you all coming. This felt like a slightly ridiculous idea 4 or 5 months ago, and many people tried to talk me out of trying to hold an event in May. I was still not totally sure anybody would show up as of 8, but I'm really glad to see you're all here, and I appreciate you waiting outside. So, really the inspiration for today for me is to try to sort of push this conversation forward. I think, my focus is much more on questions than answers. I don't feel like I have all the answers. I don't feel like anyone has all the answers. And I feel like there's a lot of people trying to convince us that they have all the answers. And so, I have tried to put together a day of programming that kind of really builds on that. And so in that theme, I wanted to start with the question that I've been asked most. I was just asked it 1 minute ago before I came on stage, which is, how do you pronounce this? It is not brand X. It is not BrXnd. And I'm looking at a few of you in particular. It is not BrXnd, which is by far the worst of the pronunciations. I just call it brand. The truth is that it really wasn't supposed to be much of anything. I built this weird collab site where you could plug 2 brands in. I'm going to talk about it a little more. And in doing that, I gave an interview with Fast Company. And because I'm an addict and I can't help myself, at the end of the interview, I told him I was doing an event for brands and AI in the spring in New York City. He knew I was lying. And he was like, are you sure that you want me to put that? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. And so that's why we're here. But why exactly? There's more than just me sort of blurting out that I thought we should do this. I have just sort of been super disappointed with the state of the conversation happening around this stuff, particularly in marketing. I feel like every headline is like 16 tips for writing better SEO headlines with ChatGPT, or 4 ways content marketing is going to change because of AI, or when is the copywriter going to get replaced by the machine? Or of course, like, when is the machine going to suck our brains out? I actually, as I was looking for the worst headlines, I stumbled on the FDA site. They have an AI page now that also includes terrible stock photography. So it's like, it's universal. Everybody just has terrible AI stock photos. Mostly, though, it's like that it doesn't match my own experience over the last year, and especially the last 6 months, that I sort of have started to integrate these tools into my life. And I just don't feel like it's represented there. I don't feel like it's represented in the way that I have experienced it. My experience has been just totally different. So, like, for me, I've probably written more code over the last 6 months than I wrote over the last 6 years. I use GitHub Copilot. As I'm building things, it's sort of adding to it. It's totally changed the way I write code, where I'm commenting things out more and actually having it sort of assist me. I'm thinking about, how do I be a better partner for the AI? I've offloaded tons of tasks that I hate doing to ChatGPT. So it's like, things like, hey, take this media release and make it sound more like my brand voice. Things that just sometimes they cripple me as a creative person. I just can't stand to do that kind of stuff. I'm not a designer, but like, having access to tools like Midjourney has been incredible. I created all the imagery for all the sessions using it. And you can just do these amazing things. I wish I could do that. I wish I was a designer. Probably if I could have one skill, it would be to be a designer, but it sort of gives me some of those tools and some of those capabilities. And then even like, I don't know how to use Photoshop, and so something as simple as like Canva has an AI magic eraser, being able to get rid of things. Like, this has been amazing for me. I feel like I have a superpower. I keep calling it a creative accelerant. And I guess like the first reason that I wanted to bring everybody together is because I felt like the way the dialogue has been going has just been very disappointing to me and very much not in line with that. It's been this thing about like, how do you use ChatGPT to write better SEO headlines? Or somebody pointed out last night that the new headline is actually, if you're just writing SEO headlines with ChatGPT, you're already lost. And it's like, it's just, it's too much. But also, interestingly and like really fundamentally, it's super confusing. And not just, I think, in the ways that people talk about it being confusing. I think there's a lot of conversation about how fast it's moving, how many new tools there are, how hard it is to keep up. But I've actually found it to be confusing in a much more fundamental way, which is that there's this really weird thing. The more time I spend using these tools, the less I feel like I understand how they're going to affect the world. And that's a like super strange feeling for me, because I've sort of built most of my career on being able to kind of predict how technology was going to reshape things. So when we started Percolate in 2011, we started it largely off a slide like this, right? So the iPhone had come out 3 years earlier, and it was pretty clear that like smartphones were going to go into everybody's hand in the world. And as they got into everybody's hand, people were going to spend more time with it, and that was going to change the way brands interacted with consumers. I don't think like we were any smarter than anyone else to recognize that would change the way marketing functioned. I think it was just pretty obvious, like it was a pretty linear curve. It was pretty intuitive. It sort of, even though smartphones were fundamentally different than a lot of other media, they were still just media, right? Like, and you could kind of predict. And AI is just like way blurrier. It's just harder for me to get. And in trying to put together this talk, I spent a lot of time trying to like sort of answer why. Like, what is it about it? Why is it blurrier? Why does it feel that way? I can't answer the question of what's going to happen. I don't feel like I can forecast into the future how it's going to change the industry. If you're here for exactly that answer, I'm sorry to disappoint you, but I'm not going to have it. But I spent a lot of time trying to think through sort of like what exactly is confusing about it. Why is it? And my answer is that it's counterintuitive. In thinking about how I was going to sort of talk about this, I really struggled because I think we throw around the word counterintuitive, and things aren't really counterintuitive. But this is actually counterintuitive. So the illustration of this is recently I got access to build plugins for ChatGPT. Plugins, if you've tried them, they let you sort of say, hey, I'm going to include kayak, and then if you ask for what are the best flights to go to Milan in August, they will show you results from kayak along with the answer, right? And I was like, okay, well, that doesn't seem that cool or useful. Like, I tried them all, whatever. And then I got development access, so I was able to build a plugin myself. And I canceled all my meetings for the day, because that's what I wanted to do that day. And I just started writing code. And I've built a lot of integrations in my life. At Percolate, we probably had integrations to 30 platforms. I've probably integrated and written code for another 40 or 50. Like, I have a very good understanding. I've spent a lot of time on pages like this. This is API spec for Facebook. Here's an API spec for Salesforce. They all look basically the same. API specs. APIs are application programming interfaces, right? And these specs describe the interface. And the interface is, what data do you need to send them? And what data are they going to send you back, right? So I have a really good intuition for how to build integrations. Like, I've done it a lot. And I started reading the specs for how to build the integration for ChatGPT. And the spec says, rather than the platform telling you how they want you to send data and how they will send you data back, they tell you to put a page in your application, and you tell the platform how you want them to send you data and how you are going to send them data back. And they say, we'll deal with everything else, right? And so this is actual code from a sort of test plugin I built to show YouTube tutorials. And in there, it says basically what the plugin does. It says how I expect them to send me data, how I want it formatted, and how I am going to send it back. So, like, when I say counterintuitive, it literally is counter to my intuition, right? Like, I have this intuition for how integrations are built, which is platforms tell you how to send and receive code, and this is the opposite, right? And it's possible because AI plays this sort of fuzzy interpreter. It is a fuzzy interface between the input and the output. And so they can magically send me data in any format I ask for it. But again, I don't know how to stress it enough, other than continuing to say it's counterintuitive, but it's like, it's fundamentally counterintuitive, right? I have spent my career building an intuition for how to build things, and this runs opposite. I know most of you probably have not built or written integrations before, so I tried to come up with some analogies. I called some friends, and so I've got sort of 3 to try on. One is, if you imagine you go to IKEA, and rather than sort of choosing to buy a table or a bookcase or a sofa, you just get a big box of parts. And you bring this box home, and when you get home, you sketch out exactly what you want, and then you get instructions using all the parts inside that box to build that thing you wanted. So you have the exact sofa you want, you have the exact bookcase you want, you have the exact anything you want. Another one maybe to try on was, like, imagine you have this sort of pipe fitter. It can fit any 2 shaped pipes, but it can also change hot water to cold water and cold water to hot water. It's just sort of like a magic thing. I called a friend of mine who was a Green Beret, and I was asking him for analogies. He's been sort of super deep into this AI world, and he told me a story about being in Afghanistan, and they needed some parts for their Humvee, and the choice was either like wait 3 weeks for the Department of Defense to go through the whole pipeline, or fly a 3D printer in and print their own, right? And in some ways, sort of like the 3D printer was the thing. But like, none of those analogies are that good, actually. And that, I think, is really interesting. Like, I think it's hard to analogize because we have built a whole language around things working in an expected way, right? The reason we don't have magic pipe fitters is because, one pipe is one size, one pipe is another size, and you want it to work. The reason APIs work in the way they do is because if they didn't, everything would break apart. Like, if you send data to another system in a way they're not expecting, they just don't know what to do with it. And if they send it back to you in a way you're not expecting, things break. Like, this is the way the world works, right? It would never work to sort of say, hey, we can build a universal plug adapter, right? But you can't just plug a random plug into the sockets here. And that, to me, is sort of really has been fundamental, is like, I don't have the answers, but it's also, I have some comfort in not having the answers. And I'm not alone. There's this amazing quote. This is, Miles Brundage is the head of policy for OpenAI. And in January, he tweeted this, and I just sort of love it. It's been rattling around in my head ever since. And basically, what he says here is, he's like, the more I use these tools, it's not that I like build some great foresight, right? Like, I don't have a magical ability to forecast into the future. What I get is a lot of insight into when people are overly confident, right? And I can understand that folks are sort of over their skis. And I think there's a lot of folks over their skis. I mean, for me, when I look around at, people like Miles Brundage, or you hear, all these people talk who are in the middle of it. Jeffrey Hinton left Google because he's worried about it. Like, these are people who have spent their life working with tools like this, and they don't know all the answers. I don't know how I could possibly know them. And so, what do we do about that? Like, how do you deal with a problem like that? That feels like a very new problem to me. I'm sure it feels like a new problem to many of you. I think we're used to being in a world where you can sort of forecast fairly linearly and understand sort of how technology is going to evolve, and culture is going to evolve, and marketing is going to evolve. And so, what do we do in this sort of new landscape where, like, it almost feels like the kind of way information works has been flipped on its head? And my best answer is, like, we need to rebuild intuition, right? So, it runs counter to our existing intuition, and I think the only thing we can do is sort of try to build it back up again. And what do I really mean by intuition? Like, this is a video of Ayrton Senna driving Monaco in 1990, I believe. And I mean, like, it's crazy, it's amazing, right? Any F1 fans have probably seen this clip, but like, this guy is coming as close as you can come to the edges of this track. He has this incredible intuition for where his car is, where the track is, where the edges are. He just knows it, right? He's clearly not thinking in a sort of like linear fashion. He just is feeling it all. And there's an even better story from Senna from a few years earlier. He was at the Dallas Grand Prix, and he crashed about 2/3 into the race. and he goes back to the pits and he tells his mechanic that he crashed because the wall moved. And like Senna was sort of famous for being a little odd, and his mechanic was like, yeah, sure, like that's why you crashed, is the wall moved. And he was like, no, really, the wall moved. And he was like, okay, whatever, man, we'll check it out after the race. And so they go out after the race, and it turned out that like 20 yards down, another car had hit the barrier, and that had pushed it out by like 2 inches. And so the wall he had hit had literally moved, right? He had such intuition for the shape of his car and the shape of his track that like he was able to detect that. Not surprisingly, there's a German word for this, which I think is real, but honestly, like I haven't had the heart to dig in and find out whether it's real. I just want it to be real, so I'm just like, I'm not bothering with whether this is factually accurate or not. It sounds good. But Fingerspitzenflügel, I believe it is. What? Fingerspitzenflügel, and it is a German term literally meaning fingertip feeling. And so that's what I feel like I've been doing. I've been trying to like build up this fingertip feeling, right, for what's going on. And I've been doing that by just making stuff, right, like just playing. And just, again, like trying to rebuild this intuition that I've built over many years of working and playing with technology to sort of understand and imagine how it might evolve in this new space. So we don't have time to go through all those. I'm happy to talk to you about all the sort of weird things I'm building. I've been writing lots about it. But I'm going to talk about one, which is this collabs project I made. So that's actually sort of where the conference came from, was I built this site. And basically what it let you do was take any 2 brands, you choose an item, and it sort of mashed them up, and it made an AI-generated collab. And it was just sort of a fun idea I had. I wasn't sure exactly, but I thought, when I saw the technology and I saw sort of, GPT's ability to write, I saw, the ability of these diffusion models to build images, I thought I was just trying to come up with something where it's like, how could I make lots of things that don't exist that could exist? And brand collabs seemed like a good version of it. And so now, probably there's like 5,000 or so in there now. Anybody can make them. You're all welcome to go on and make them. Some of them look amazing. Some of them look very strange. But the process is pretty simple. So what happens is I built a fine-tuned model. So I took about 500 examples of real collab announcements. And I fine-tuned a model to write the collab announcement. So the first thing that happens in the process is not that the image gets generated, it's the marketing copy gets generated, basically, right? So the collab announcement gets generated. Then I have another model that extracts an aesthetic description from the collab announcement, from the marketing copy. And then I have another one that generates a prompt off that. And then finally, it generates an image. And the results are just like, they've been kind of amazing. This is a favorite of mine because my 13-year-old niece asked for this one. The Hello Kitty Nike Dunks, the perfect combination of style and comfort. The Nike times Hello Kitty Dunk Low SB deal way to add a touch of sweetness to your wardrobe. So again, it's all generated. There's lots of these things, Patagonia and Fruit Loop, Grateful Dead and Hermes. So I've just sort of like watched so many of these come by, and throughout the process, I've just learned a lot, and there's been a lot of things that really sort of sparked new ideas for me. And the first one, and the most important, and probably sort of like the fundamental one for this whole event, is that when I was first building this thing and looking at all these images come through, I noticed that good brands made better images. And at first, that sounds really obvious, right? Like, of course, good brands should make better images. They're good brands. But for that to be true, it means that somehow these models hold a similar sense of what a good brand is to us. And like, that actually is not obvious at all. Like that somehow they figured out that good brands are the same as we did. And I think the reason for that, it's hard to know for sure, right? Because the model can't tell us. But I think the reason for that is actually that, like, fundamentally what these things are is pattern recognition machines, right? They recognize patterns. And what good brands do is generate patterns in a really consistent manner, right? And I think probably those two things match up really well. But again, like it seems really obvious that this would happen this way. But if you actually kind of like break it down and think about how these models are trained, what they're trained off, like nobody tells them what a good brand is, right? They have learned that themselves. And again, I think it's because the sort of acts of building a good brand and good marketing lend themselves particularly well to the way these things are trained. Another one that's been really fascinating, and again, these are just sort of me building up this intuition, just like learning new things, is this relative strength. So when you mash up these two brands with the AI, one of the things that comes out that's really fun and interesting is you get a sense of which brand the AI thinks is stronger based on which brand sort of you see more in the output, right? So on the left is Hermes and the Financial Times. And on the right is Hermes and the Simpsons, right? And you can see which one is much more clearly the brand and which one gets lost. And again, I think they're right, basically, right? Like that, it makes sense that the strength of one brand would overpower the strength of another. But again, to understand that means that somewhere in the model, there's sort of some sense of which one is stronger. Another one that's been fascinating and fun is that it picks up on art direction, which again, like things that are obvious in retrospect, that art direction is a part of the brand identity, but it clearly, like, the brands that consistently deliver a visual like that, it has managed to pull that out. One response a lot of people have is that, oh, well, like probably what the brand is picking up on is scale, right? So that the biggest brands are just getting picked up. But that's not true either in my experience. So like looking at lots of these images, one of the fascinating things I found is that you can have much smaller brands like ALD, or a favorite of mine is Ghostly, which is my friend Sam Valenti's record label. But these brands that have really strong aesthetics, right? Super strong brands, but they're not anywhere near as big as Coca-Cola or Nike or any of these others. But it's not just scale, right? Like they have picked up the brand because I think, fundamentally, they're still, good branding is about good branding. And probably my favorite of all of them is this brand versus category thing. So the image on the right is a Dunkin' times Saucony shoe. And what you'll notice first in that Dunkin' Saucony shoe is that there's a giant swoosh on it. Which technically is a mistake, right? It's technically a hallucination. But again, I don't think it's actually a mistake. Like I think if we went out on the street and we asked a bunch of people what a sneaker was, they would tell us that a sneaker is a Nike, right? Like I think it is an accurate reflection of the perception of people. Like it is technically an error, but I think it's actually, for marketers, it's kind of a good error. Like we, as marketers, actually live in this weird world where the perception is the truth. And in this way, I think these tools are particularly well suited to our discipline. The last one, and something I want to sort of write about more and talk about more, is my friends at System 1 actually ran a bunch of testing on the collabs and were blown away by the levels that they came back at. Like some of these collabs came back in the 90th percentile of everything they've ever tested. And so, there's something in there. Again, you're giving it really powerful ingredients, right? Like, that one at the top is Nike and Coca-Cola. Like, probably amongst the 5 most iconic brands that exist on the planet. But it's still, when you put those things together, it's sort of very capable and very interesting. So again, my goal for opening today was just sort of like lay some groundwork, try to kind of set the scene, talk a little about kind of where should we expect things to go, how should we think about things. My takeaways really are just like, ask questions, don't worry about answers. I don't think that anybody has good answers. I think that like we need to kind of stop listening to so many people that sound so confident about it. Because again, when you look at the people who know the most about it, they seem to be the least confident in their understanding of exactly where it's going to go. And so when there are people out there telling us that they're absolutely confident how things are going to change, I think we should all be a little more skeptical. And then the last piece is just tinkering. I think for me, I think that the process over the next few years probably is going to be rebuilding intuition, right? Like we have an intuition for how the world works. The analogy actually I was thinking about this morning is there's a great book about quantum physics called Beyond Weird. It is an approachable book. I am not a quantum physicist. But the thesis of the book basically is that the reason people feel like quantum physics is weird is because we have a whole language built around the Newtonian world, right? Like we have a language of mass, and we talk about things in this way where we expect them to be existing where we can see them, right? And we expect sort of things to work in the way, and we have built a vocabulary to do that. And when we move into the quantum world where things don't work that way, we now lack words. And I think that like a lot of what we have to do is sort of rebuild some of that vocabulary and that intuition that we've built up over many years. And that is certainly frightening for many people, but I don't know, for me it's kind of fun. So let's talk quickly about the day ahead. The way I have programmed the day is I've sort of set up these kind of bookend fireside chats or tentpole pieces, right? So we're gonna have a chat about brands, we're gonna have a chat about bias, we're gonna have a chat about technology, about creative, about legal. And those are gonna be more sort of conversations, right? They're gonna be sort of hearing from people, hearing from a CMO, hearing from a chief creative officer. What are the conversations like? How are you thinking about these things? What's going on, right? You know, there aren't that many people who have done lots of stuff with this yet. And so it's more just sort of like trying to get a sense, helping everybody feel like they're on the same page. And then in between those is lots of cool stuff, basically. And my goal in programming the cool stuff was, as much as possible, to sort of show you things that I thought you could go use tomorrow, right? And have people come up and talk about, you know, how they're using AI in strategy, how they're using it in research, how they're using it in commerce or branding or creative development. Just kind of all these pieces, but like tools you could actually go play with and get your hands on, right? In the sort of spirit of tinkering and playing and enjoying. So with that, I'm gonna end this part of my talk. Thank you very much.